Hello everyone, and in this video I'm going to be giving an update to my leave of absence from med school. And one of the things that the dean told me as I was leaving was that I should do things to remind myself, why did I get into this in the first place and just see what it's like. And so recently I was shadowing one of the doctors I was shadowing who wrote one of my letters of recommendation for med school. And I just wanted to share an experience I had that I thought was really interesting for me, and hopefully you guys find it interesting too. And so basically, the doctor I was shadowing, I'm going to be careful here not to say any personally identifiable information. But basically, the doctor I'm shadowing is primary care, family med, or occupational med, and it's all kind of the same thing, really. Basically, what we were doing is, and I was literally following him like all over the place. Like, what is it like to really be a doc? And so the MRI came in. We had the patient give it, or well, we didn't even see the patient yet, but we had the disc from the imaging company that showed what this patient's MRI had, and so. Basically, this patient was complaining of shooting pains down their right leg. They were very physically active and very, their occupation was an EMT, and, early 30s, young, very fit, works out a lot. And so there was pain with flexion of the torso. So basically, like leaning forward would cause a lot of pain, in addition to squats. And so that's what we were being told, and this is what we were reviewing at this MRI together, and the doctor I was shadowing had to take a call, so I was kind of left in the room to just look at this MRI before I was led to believe anything or look in a certain area. And so basically I was looking at the lumbar spine and around the sacral spine, so L4, L5, S1, S2 areas. And what I was seeing, and this is something that I learned in anatomy from, those first parts of medical school, was the disc herniations. So between each one of your vertebra, so the bony bits, you've got these things sandwiched in between them, and those are your intervertebral discs. And these are basically kind of like jelly-filled sacs that have a little bit of cushion to them. And so the issue with herniation is that you've got these two rocks, and they press down on this little jelly bean thing, or gelatinous thing, and it causes that thing to squeeze out, to kind of mushroom out. And the issue is that when that thing mushrooms out, it presses on something nearby. And so, people who have a lot of load on the top part of their body, you're basically forcing those rocks to come together and push out those intervertebral discs. And the consequence of this is that you start building up pressure on nerves. And so, when someone says, I've got this shooting pain on my right leg, and it's tingling, that's very indicative of sciatic nerve. And so basically in that lumbar spinal area, you've got that spinal nerve for I think it's S1, coming out to become the sciatic nerve. And so if you've got that herniation, that intervertebral disc coming out and pressing on that sciatic nerve, then you can literally see what's causing the patient's symptoms, and it's pretty cool. And that's probably the reason why MRI is so powerful. Unfortunately, it's very expensive, and it does take a while to get. The patient has to stand still for about 30 minutes in that room. But it is super powerful at diagnosing these things. And so, we were able to see exactly what was causing this patient's pain. And I think it's just awesome that we have spectroscopy available to us to make these types of diagnoses. It's really cool. And so like the radiologist also had a report. So like, even if we didn't see anything, or if we, even if you couldn't make out like what was going on here, or, was that a labral tear or not? It did have the report from the radiologist so that you could just review it and see exactly what was going on. And so, it was for me pretty cool to just, again, kind of go through this stuff now with more context. Like I felt like I actually understood the conversations that were being had. And like I was with the doctor as he was explaining to the patient, what intervertebral discs were and what vertebra were, and how, you've got the transverse foramen and the intervertebral foramen where that spinal nerve shoots out, but that thing is going to get pinched off as, you've got those vertebrae that come closer and closer together as you load up more things in your upper body. So like, as you do things like carry weights or grocery bags, you're putting a lot more load on that load travels up through your arms into your shoulders and then down through your spine. And so the more pressure you put down on that spine, like if you're carrying a 100-pound backpack or if you're carrying 100-pound weights by your arms, like all that load has to make its way through your spine and down your legs and down to your feet. And so, you're not doing yourself any favors by putting more load on that, especially when you've got disc herniation. And so, just being there, going through it all, it was super cool to get that experience of seeing how applicable a lot of the stuff is that we were learning. And it was super fast paced. It was super intense, but at the same time, it's applicable and you can actually see it through MRIs. And so like all that pain and suffering and anatomy, it does pay off. And I think anatomy is probably one of the most important things that you learn in medical school for being a doctor. Is like you have to know how all this stuff looks and how it relates to each other through its form. And so it was pretty cool to get that experience. And I will say this too, like I shadowed before I went to med school. I was shadowing this doctor just as a medical assistant. I didn't really, actively contribute to those conversations, but in this time, because I had all this like more knowledge, like I felt like I could follow and I could even chime in. And fortunately, the doctor I'm with encourages that. And so, after explaining what disc herniation was to the patient and talking about how this is something that we're going to refer to orthopods, orthopedic surgeons, to do a further analysis on or diagnosis, basically like made it clear, the doctor's making it clear to the patient that even though, there is disc herniation, we, explained what it is, said it, probably doesn't need surgery, but an orthopedic surgeon would know more context as to like what are the best resolutions or follow-up procedures for a herniated disc. Unfortunately, the guy's still pretty young. As you get older, the amount of liquid in that intervertebral disc decreases over time. But like, all these things, was just having a conversation with the patient, explaining what's going on, explaining what the next steps are. There are some additional tests to look for. So like a suspected labral tear was like noted in the radiology report. So what, one thing we did or could do is basically ask the patient to do hip adduction. So that's where if your legs are like this, you would swing your leg kind of in or towards the other leg. So that's adducting your hip. And if the patient has pain during that range of motion, that could indicate a labral tear. So radiology can't tell you everything. You also have some other tests that you should check for when the patient's in front of you as the primary care doc. And it's just really cool to kind of get to see how all these different fields come together in medicine and in practice. So it was really awesome. So anyway, getting back to the story, I know it's a little disorganized, but basically like, explain to the patient the problem, explain to the patient, what we're going to do next. They're going to be going to see an orthopod. And then and so the doc kind of stopped at that point, and then I jumped into the conversation, and I just wanted to like explain to this patient like why is it so important that so now you understand the issue, like just hitting home the fact that when you've got disc herniations, ideally you're going to be doing the like just lifestyle changes. Basic simple lifestyle changes can make a huge impact on the quality of life. It's just people need to understand why they need to make those changes, I feel like, to help them understand and actually do it. And so like I was explaining to the patient like how, you've got all this load transfer down to your lumbar spine. And so when you are squatting or when you're doing any kind of weight training, like those Olympic lifts where you push this weight over your head, you're creating tons of force that travels through your spine, down to that lower spine. And so that's not helping that disc herniation. That's bulging it out even more. And so, the key things to just the really simple stuff of like, working out's great. You need exercise. It's wonderful that you're getting exercise and that you want to exercise. But at the same time, changing what exercises you're doing will make a big impact on, your quality of life. Because if you keep pressing those spinal or those vertebrae together, you're going to force out that intervertebral disc even more. It's going to press even more on that spinal cord, and you're going to have even more problems. So it's just like literally explaining this, I think, really helps. And so I tried doing that for the patient. And then I also said how important just basic posture is. Like, kids these days with their phones, always looking at your phone like this. When you introduce that flexion in your neck, that dramatically increases the load on the lumbar spine as well. So making sure that you've got good posture, you stand upright, and there's ways of measuring like the gravitational line of people. So like you're checking the different reference points. So like the lateral malleolus, the greater trochanter, the Chromian process, and then the external auditory meatus should make a straight line. You can look these pictures up on the internet, but basically like, making sure that you've got this neutral standing position with you is the best way of ensuring that the weight transfer is moving through the spine the way it should, and you're not putting excessive forces on particular locations. Because if you do that, that's how you end up with problems like this, because your spine wasn't designed to take those types of loads. Especially when you've got people who are carrying 50-pound supply bags with them or equipment, and they're going in all kinds of weird angles and positions and movements. It causes forces on the body that the body wasn't designed to handle, and it results in things like disc herniations. And so just really explaining to people like why good form is important, making sure that you've got the right posture is important, I think goes a really long way. And so it was really cool to kind of be in that moment with the doctor and the patient and see it. So I will say it's pretty cool. The other thing I will add to this, because I know it's a bit of a long video right now, but what I will say is that one of the issues I see as being a doctor, and I think this is something that maybe a lot of people think is obvious, but 20% of your time is that time, that golden time of you're in that exam room, you're with that patient, you're working with the patient, you're diagnosing the problem, you're trying to help the patient understand the issues and what a treatment plan will look like, or what the various treatment plans look like, and what are the pros and cons of each treatment plan based on their medical history. That's the fun stuff. That's the stuff that, your medical school education is all supposed to be about. That's 20% of your time. The other 80% of your time is easily spent in phone calls and emails. And so like the doctor I was with, and I stayed with him the whole time, it was really cool. Got to see like what the other side of the story looks like. That most of the time goes into getting on a phone call to talk with an insurance doctor, a utilization review doc, as to whether or not a particular treatment was necessary or appropriate for a given medical circumstance with a patient. And so like these types of, so much of the work is not what you think it is or what people write about. Like people write about how they want to be that primary care doc in that exam room, helping that patient in that moment. But a huge part of the picture is also the just the BS. And this is a private practice. But it's not necessarily BS, because it is important to have checks and balances in the healthcare system so you don't get inflated costs, which we already have a lot of. But at the same time, if you're spending most of your time as a doctor just trying to justify why a particular treatment is medically necessary or appropriate, and you're not able to treat patients and get them back on their feet and make them productive members of society again, then I think something's wrong with that system. Because ideally, we want to improve people's health outcomes. We want people to be productive members of society. Like it makes sense financially, it makes sense, emotionally. Like there's a lot of reasons why that's the ideal outcome for a lot of people. And I think we've got a system in place that has a lot of issues. And so these are just some notes I wanted to make to you guys on this whole process and where I am now. I'm really grateful that I get to kind of step back from it all. Because I think, the issue for me with school was it was just 8 hours every day, pre-recorded Zoom calls that I was not engaged in at all. I know the content's important. I know the content helps in situations like this where, you got to understand how these things come together and work to diagnose it. Like if you don't understand how something should work, how would you know how it's broken? Like you can't diagnose something unless you understand a few concepts as to how it's supposed to work. And so the issue is just that learning curve is so huge to get to that point. And even when you're at that point and when you're practicing, that's still not 100% of your job. Like a huge part of your job is just that administrative stuff in the back end of justifying to an insurance company like why something is medically necessary. And so, that's definitely probably a pain point for many people. And so, but I just wanted to give this update. I hope everyone out there is doing well. Happy holidays, and I will talk to you guys next time.